Here's my thing. I'm working on genealogy, and I'm back in the early 1900s. I did write that down. Oh, weird. Dan has a Master's of Divinity from San Francisco Theological Seminary, and he's co-founder and executive director of the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing. And he's got some of his new books here, and I'm so impressed how many. I think you've written at least 6 books, maybe more. Yeah. I do want to caution you, everybody's gotten pretty good about when you have a question, we'd like you to be on the mic for our home audience, people watching on YouTube. And so we'll get a mic to you before you ask your question, and we'd appreciate that. So I'll turn it over to Dan. Let's give him a good round of applause.
All right, well, thank you very much. And it's great to be here. It's great to be back. And yeah, the space looks different, right? We were doing the Sunday forums downstairs in the cave. It's a much nicer environment for this. I'd like to just begin with some quiet. So let us pray. Amen. Yeah, so as was mentioned, I do have some copies of the book here. They're $15, and you know, cash, check, abacus, counting, I don't know, whatever. We could do Venmo, you know, all the things. Because it's 1918, and you know, we've you know, we've got a lot of different ways of doing things now. So, I love that. That's really great. Yeah. That's about how old I feel a lot of times these days. All right, so actually, for those of you that were at the 9 o'clock service and heard this sermon, this was really kind of a great setup for what I want to spend some time reflecting on. And you know, the other introductory thing that I would say about this is that I would have to say that the question I'm being asked the most these days is, what do we do? Right? What do we do? Which is, of course, the great, you know, Protestant work ethic American question, right? Like, it reminds me of my favorite bumper sticker, Jesus is coming, look busy. Right? Right. You know, so what do we do? And, you know, of course, this community and, you know, our nation as a whole, but definitely this community, we're full of very good doers, right? We're all very good doers. We're all very successful. There are 37 doctorate degrees in this room alone, you know, that kind of thing, right? And so we want to know, like, what do we do? What do we do? And, you know, we heard this message about reconciliation and God reconciling God's self to the world, and so we should be reconciled. And the immediate question that arises is, well, how do we do that? How do we do that, right? I'm going to go close this other door. Do that. They're gone. Thank you. Come back in. So how do we manifest this incredible thing that we are told God is up to, or that we are to be up to, right? And, it's always really great to, to have a very clear adversary, right? That's always what brings people together. Like, well, we're all the same, the bad guys are out there. And that makes communities feel very cohesive and very righteous. But of course we know that even within any given community, there's plenty of things that are not reconciled. Right. Now I know that that's not true in churches, but other kinds of communities maybe. Right? We do not have to scratch too far below the surface to find all the ways that people are in conflict and disagreement, where people are unloving, uncaring, where people want to go home and blast each other with emails and messages and all kinds of things, and so this great spiritual process is both incredibly difficult and incredibly mysterious, right? How do we actually do this, right? What do we do? And so in the biblical tradition, as well as in all spiritual traditions, there is this understanding of the spiritual path, right? And in our tradition, this is referred to often as the wisdom tradition, right? So the idea is that if there is this human point of view, as Dwayne was talking about, if there is this problem that we as humans have, in the Buddhist tradition they talk about the ego process, and other traditions they talk about being disconnected from God or from the universe in one way or another. If we have this problem, we as human beings, our software is defective. That would be the modern term. Like, there's all kinds of great stuff that we can do, right? So, the human mind and the way it functions allows us to be in the world in all kinds of incredible ways. But there is this defect, right? There is this defect. And this defect is, right, that we become fundamentally self-centered in one way or another, we as individuals and we as communities, and then we become disconnected, right? So the spiritual tradition, this wisdom tradition, basically says, okay, how is it that we are going to practice something different? Right? Because that's what it's a matter of doing, right? This idea of reconciliation is not really like flipping a switch and, okay, everything's fine. Right? That would be nice. That would be great. But it really is day to day, day in and day out, we practice all kinds of things. That's one way of just looking at how our lives are, right? So, you get up in the morning and you practice getting dressed, and you practice cleaning yourself, and you practice brushing your teeth, and you practice going to work, and you practice this, that, and the other thing, right? You practice being a parent, you practice being a good citizen, right? And there are all these activities that we are continually doing over and over and over and over again. And in fact, in some ways, right, what the goal of this is is we want to be able to do all kinds of things without thinking about it. Because that makes our life a lot easier, right? If I had to figure out every morning how to get dressed, that'd be a bad day, right? If I had to figure out every morning how to walk, right, and those of us that get injured and have to do rehab, we know what this is like, right? It's hard. And we suddenly realize, like, wow, being able to walk on autopilot was great. Right? So the idea is that we're practicing all these things so that a higher and higher percentage of our lives can be on autopilot, so then we've got some space to do the stuff that we really want to think about. Right? Now, the thing is, though, if we want to do something new, right, if this reconciliation thing is this different thing, right, so we know how to be divided, we know how to have enemies, we know how to fight, we know how to not care about each other, we know how to do all those things. Like, we're very good at that. So if we want to do something different, we have to practice different things. Right? We have to practice different things. And this really is the essence of the wisdom tradition, and Jesus very much stands in this wisdom tradition as an indigenous Hebrew teacher. I'm part of an online church community that meets pretty early Eastern time, so sometimes I get to hear what's happening before I do whatever else I'm doing on Sunday morning. And my friend who was preaching this morning, gave everybody the great reminder that, remember, Jesus wasn't talking to Christians, because there weren't any. Right? There weren't any. Right? So Jesus is this indigenous Hebrew wisdom teacher. And the way that the book is organized is around the Sermon on the Mount. Right? Now, the Sermon on the Mount is a very, very interesting talk. Right? I assert that this is one of the more radical talks in human history, which is why we ignore it. Right? The phrase I came up with recently was "just kidding, Jesus." Like Jesus was just kidding when he said all these things, which is kind of the way that we relate to the Sermon on the Mount, because we read it, we're like, well, no, we can't do that. Well, no, we can't do that. Oh, no, that we definitely can't do. Right? You kind of go down the list of all the things he talks about that we don't do. And if we even did 10% of what he asks us to do in there, society would be completely different than it is now. Right? So the thing about this, and the reason I say this falls in the wisdom tradition, is that if you read the Sermon on the Mount, there are a number of things that you can really notice about it. So one is that it is not religious. Right? What do I mean by that? There is nothing in the Sermon on the Mount that is about doctrine or dogma. Jesus does not spend his time reflecting on whether or not he is the second person of the Trinity, one in essence with God the Father, and the same substance as the Holy Spirit. And, there are only some people that are allowed to give communion if they've been certified by the right appropriate group. And the order of worship always has to be as follows, with the kind of bulletin that you are supposed to have. Right? There's none of that. There's nothing religious in this. It is not dogmatic or doctrinal in any way. And that is the essence of the wisdom tradition. The wisdom tradition looks very seriously at what it is that we are to do to live and be different in the world. We as individuals, but more importantly, society. Right? See, the idea of individual salvation, which is so popular in modern Christianity, is completely foreign to the Bible. There is just about nothing about individual salvation in the Bible. because ancient societies were not individualistic, right? Individualism is a modern construction. And what the Bible is concerned about, and what these indigenous teachers are concerned about, is the kingdom, right? The society. I mean, the kingdom is sort of a shorthand for society. It's the whole thing. And the interest that God has is for the kingdom to be a kingdom of justice. Now, the thing is that justice is one of those high concept words, right? So immediately when you hear a high concept word, you're like, what is anybody talking about? And the problem with high concept words is that everybody has their own definition. And so you all think you're talking about the same thing, but you're actually talking about 20 different things. Right? So one person is talking about locking up criminals, one person is talking about, being nice to homeless people, one person is talking, right, on and on and on. So what is the definition? And the other thing is that when we come to concepts that we're a little nervous about actually doing, we have this great stock phrase that we talk about as a way of deflecting. We say, well, that's very complicated. That's so complicated. We need to have a committee to work that out. because that's just really difficult. Right? Except the thing is that biblical justice is actually defined in a very clear and simple way. And it's repeated over and over again throughout the Bible because God is concerned that maybe we need a little repetition to listen more carefully. So it's very, very simple. Right? The biblical gold standard for justice is the widows and orphans are fed. Okay, now why the widows and orphans? Because in an ancient society where people can't just, go out and get a job, there's no such thing as a job. In ancient society, you're either born into some kind of profession, or you're a subsistence farmer, or you're part of the ruling class, right? Those are the three things that people do. So if you're a widow and an orphan, you are a disposable human being, right? Because women are property, and so if you're not married and you don't have a family, you're not worth anything. And if you're an orphan, then as a child, you also are not attached to a family, so you're also not worth anything, right? So those are the people on the bottom of the barrel, so to speak. And the idea of a just society is one where, so everybody in the barrel, all the way down to the bottom, has their basic needs met. That's biblical justice. And of course, by that rubric, every single society in human history fails. Every single one. Because there are always disposable people that are always just dying. Right? One of the great stories in 1 Kings, one of the great Elijah stories, right? And to kind of, again, drive home this point, because, we need a little repetition. Right, what does Elijah do? He goes to the gate of the city, and he sees a widow, and she says, and he says, hey, what's happening? You having a good day? She's like, no, I'm having a really bad day. I've got one little cup of flour. I'm going to go home and prepare it for my son and I, and we are going to die. Right, and so the big miracle, right, and again, if we think about this, right, Elijah is sort of one of the, top 5 spiritual people in the Bible, spiritual giants. So I think, wow, Elijah can do really great stuff. What does Elijah do? He goes home with the woman and her son and performs this miracle where the flour lasts indefinitely, and so they have food. Now, if we think about it, like from our point of view, feeding 2 people doesn't actually seem like that big of a deal. I mean, that's not like, I don't know, some really big miracle. But the reason that this is such a big miracle in the Bible is because this is the thing that no kingdom has succeeded in doing. Right? Enacting this kind of justice where the people on the bottom get enough to eat. Right? Okay. So the issue then around this sermon and around the wisdom tradition is, what are these sets of habits and practices? What are the sets of habits and practices? Where do we start? What do we do? So I have free stuff. I'm gonna pass these out. Sorry to you online, you don't get any free stuff. I don't know if I have enough, but maybe we'll have a miracle. There's always a way. Let's see, I'll go on this side to see if there are extras. See, look, and there were enough bookmarks for everyone.
I want to see you do that.
That's for the next class. Okay, so what we've got here, so these are the 12 practices. These are the 12 practices that are in the book, and they, as I said, they follow different passages, different snippets out of the Sermon on the Mount. So I don't use the whole thing because it's really long, but these are 12 that I was extracted here. And the way that these 12 are organized, and one of the things that if you get more interested in this, if you want to do some kind of group on the book, there's also a study guide that goes along with this that you can get for free as a PDF, and so some of this stuff is in there as well. The way that these 12 practices are organized are in concentric circles. Kind of have this image of these concentric circles, right? And so the first circle, which is these first 3 practices, is this very basic ground of what is it that a community needs to do to begin to organize itself around this issue of transformation, right? So, if this group of people, if Plymouth, if whoever, whatever community said, we want to become the kingdom of God. And it's sort of audacious, but it's like, that's what we keep saying. Like, we keep saying, oh, the great kingdom of God, that's what we want to do, right? I mean, I don't know, I hear this a lot, so I'm assuming that that's the idea. Right, so we want to do that. So what do we do? So this first set of practices is preparing this ground, because in order to grow something different, or to be different, you have to be grounded in a different way in the world, right? You have to have a basically different orientation, because we all have an orientation, right? So our orientation that we've been hearing since we were a little kid is, get a job, right? That's our orientation, is survive in the capitalist economy. Get a job, be a good citizen, get some money, hopefully have enough money to retire, do whatever we're going to do, right? That's our orientation. And work is then what we center all of that around. Okay? So the spiritual life orientation is fundamentally different. So in the various monastic rules, which are the documents that over the last 1,500 years have been trying to orient these communities that are trying to do this, They use the word work in the rule, but the word work does not refer to what we think of work as. So this is, again, where you have to define your concepts, right? We hear work, we're like, oh yeah, go out in the garden, dig stuff, build stones, No, the work of the community is the life of prayer. Right? That's the work. Everything else supports that. So working in the garden, building, whatever, all of that, that is not the work of the community. Those are simply the activities that are necessary because we're material beings and we have to eat and have shelter and all of that to support the work of the community. So one of the things, for example, that I notice all the time, because I'm always talking to people about their spiritual lives, spirituality, all of that, is people will say to me, well, I don't have time to do that because I'm so busy. I'm doing all these other important things. And, well, maybe at 2 in the morning or something, if I happen to be up, maybe I'll do a little prayer practice then, or maybe when I get less busy. So I'm a rock and roller, right? That's the Creedence Clearwater song. Someday never comes. You never get less busy, do you? No. How many people have I talked to who are like, oh, I retired. I'm more busy than I ever was. Kind of thinking, maybe you want to re-examine your priorities. Okay. So that statement about I don't have time for my spiritual life is a reflection of this disordered fundamental orientation. So what would it be to say we are going to order our lives around our spiritual life as a community? Right? We are going to order our lives around times that we come together for prayer practice. We're going to do that every day. It is going to be the most important thing that we do. Right? You would have no members in your church anymore because that's such a radical thing. Right? Okay, so then there are a couple others. I don't have time to go through all of them, but that's the first circle. Now then the second circle, okay, so once you kind of have this grounded orientation, what happens next? What do you encounter next? Well, the next thing you encounter are relationships. Right? And relationships are really the problem in a lot of ways. Right? Right? I mean, it's super easy to be enlightened by yourself. It's so easy. You go somewhere, it's beautiful, you have a nice view, the sun is setting, the birds are chirping. I'm so enlightened. I'm one with God. Everything is great. I go back to the parking lot. Somebody is blocking my car. And I become a raging jerk. I am not enlightened anymore. And that other person is an idiot. Can't they see where the lines in the parking lot are? Right? Okay, so the thing is that being enlightened in community is a lot harder. Right? Again, this is the problem. Right? Society is the problem. So we have to have a set of practices. How do we engage in relating to each other in a different way? And so these 3 practices, right? Self-awareness, powerful presence, and compassionate relationship. And again, these are all described in a lot of detail. Have to do with basically an other orientation. Well, it's 2 steps. One is that I am aware of myself. Now, we think that doesn't sound like a relationship practice. But in order to relate to another as a real human being, I actually need to be aware of myself and how I am not relating to others as a human being. If I'm not aware of that, I can't make any kind of shifts in the way that I am dealing with the outside world. Right? But if I'm aware of myself and my projections, then now I can begin to see through those to actually see other people as human. And of course, my guess is that everybody in this room knows that the violence we do against each other is predicated on not seeing others as human. Right? You can't ignore bombing children if you don't really think they're like your children. Right? So the people in the community begin to bump up against each other and annoy each other, right? That's what we do. I mean, we annoy each other, right? I mean, that's sort of the fundamental human activity, right? Is annoying one another. Put away your socks. I bumped into the open kitchen cabinet again. Right? That person at work is a real pain in the ass. We just do. We annoy each other. Right? So how is it that we can begin to practice relating to each other in this different, loving, compassionate way? Right? Where these annoyances really start to dissolve in the face of this unifying spirit that we're talking about, in the presence of this unifying spirit. Okay, so then the third layer, and in some ways, I'm going to say this about all these layers. All these layers are the most important layers. Right? But the third layer is, I think, in our society, the most revolutionary in a way. Right? Because the first two layers are a lot about kind of psychological, spiritual activities, and we're sort of used to hearing about spirituality in that way, right? I sit quietly, I'm loving, I'm compassionate. I mean, we've all heard a lot of that stuff. Okay, but the third layer is, because again, the thing about kingdoms, and if this justice thing, right, widows and orphans being fed, the thing about kingdoms is that they are the construction, the way that human beings are relating to each other in the material world. Right? We're material beings. We have to eat, we have to have shelter, clothing, right? So how are we relating to this materiality? And the thing that the empire and the religion of the empire does is it wants to disconnect spirituality from materiality. Right? And the thing that we then don't understand is that ultimately the spiritual life is an alternative economic model. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Right? The spiritual life is an alternative economic model. All right, alternative to what? So, I mean, right now, we're living under global capitalism, so that's the economic model that we're relating to. But over history, there have been numerous economic models, right? So there's the sort of ancient imperial economic model, then you've got a feudalism economic model in Europe, you've got, this colonial economic model, and then now we've got the capitalist economic model. The thing that all of those have in common is that they are extractive. Right? So what does that mean? We take stuff from the people who are actually doing the work and we move it up the ladder so that the people at the top get richer and richer and richer and richer. All these systems have this in common. Right? This is where, we go somewhere, we're like, oh, let's go visit the castle. The castle's so pretty, so cool. And it's up on a hill. Gee, isn't that neat? You look. Why is it up on a hill? It's up on the hill so that the peasants can't get there and kill the king. Because the king is going down the hill and taking stuff from the peasants. Right? So the spiritual life is an alternative to this extractive economic model. And the spiritual life basically says, give away your stuff so that everybody can have some. Very bad idea. Right? That's what we think. Very bad idea. Okay? And, you know, if we look at these different biblical stories, again, God is trying to explain this to us over and over again. So one of the first big ones, right, the manna in the wilderness. What is the basic instruction about manna in the wilderness? Okay, basic instruction is, just take enough for one day. Don't take more than you need. Right? That's anti the extractive accumulative system. And of course, some people take more than they need, and then what happens? Well, it just rots, and it's no good. Okay? So there's a set of practices then that are helping us to basically move into this place where sharing to where everybody has their basic needs met is the thing that we are always practicing. Right? Okay, and the community starts to do this, and then that begins to move out into the society as a whole. I know I want to leave time for some questions and comments, so I'm going to move through this quickly. So then the final layer, the final ring, is this much wider ring of, okay, how are we relating to now the world as a whole? How are we looking at peace? How are we looking at justice? And how are we looking at all of this as an integrated system of a way of life and being in the world? Okay. Now, over time, again, in all kinds of traditions, groups of people have done these things. So, I mean, none of this is new at all. Groups of people have done these things, and what has been found over and over and over again is that not only within the community is the kingdom of God manifest, but around the community, in the wider society, things get better. Right? Things get better. There's more peace. The land gets more productive, which is very interesting to me. All kinds of things become more harmonious. What has never happened, right, what we're still waiting for, is that this is not tipped over into this is how human beings function as a whole. Right? So little groups of people do it, it works great. They may last a long time, a short time, it sort of goes away, right? People try it again. And, you know, what many of us are hoping for is that at some point there is some kind of tipping point to where behaving like this becomes normal. Right now, this is abnormal. This is revolutionary. This is weird. This is not possible. The other thing is normal. It would really be nice if that flipped around. Okay, so I have talked for a long time. So questions, comments? I know when are we supposed to finish, like 5 of or something?
Well, yeah, by 10 of, but
By 10
I'm sure
of.
you could take up till 5 of.
That's
Yeah.
what- I feel the flu coming on. Yeah, so any comments, questions, thoughts? You guys are so attentive. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Can you describe these groups?
Oh, wait, we've got to have the mic.
When you describe many communities have tried to do this, I think about monasteries. I think about the hippie era, the communes, and then there's the intent is correct initially, like socialism or, communism. It was to share, and then it became evil itself. Like or Animal Farm. It's that story, the parable. So is it? So I guess that's the how part is how granular or small can the communities be to actually be successful in doing life a new way.
Yeah.
I don't, it just is something for me to ponder.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and the thing is that there isn't any particular, size requirement, right? It's just starting to do it. Yeah, I mean, it's just starting to do it, and people entering into, and this is why boundaries is one of the grounding practices. People have to enter into a commitment to do this together, right? One of the real problems with the parish church system is that there are no real agreements that people enter into about what we're doing together, right? And so everybody has their own idea of what we're up to. And, when you have a completely unbounded situation like that, you can't sort of move in certain particular direction. So one of the basic issues is, again, not how many people, but it's, are we trying to do this with an intention? And that's one of the starting points. What is it that we're up to? Right. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you think we're making any progress. I'm thinking of two things. One is Martin Luther King saying the arc of justice bends slowly, but it bends towards justice, something like that. Yes. That's one thing. The second thing is I actually heard on this program with Ian Bremmer, G0 World. I was so impressed by this guy that I made a note in my phone. And it's Steven Pinker, who is a Harvard psychologist, and he wrote an article called, "Is the World Actually Getting Better?" Mm-hmm. And his thing was, it is, because he said it used to be 90% of the people in the world were hungry. Now it's only 50% of the people in the world that are hungry, which seems still very pathetic, but obviously an improvement. So I just wondered, do you think it's getting better?
Yeah. Yeah, so, a good friend of mine who's a black Episcopal priest, in some conversation a few months ago said, yeah, you keep hearing that, the arc of history bends towards justice, and it's like, does it?
I don't know.
Does it? I think there are some ways that we can say things are better. I think there are many ways in which we can say nothing has changed. I think there are some ways in which we can say things are worse. The 20th century, I'm familiar with that article, and some people have written these books about, yes, with progress, things are getting a lot better. I mean, the 20th century, worldwide, we slaughtered 200 million people in wars. Now, 200 million, I mean, that's a sort of interesting number because 200 million is what the stable population of the entire Earth was, human population, for thousands of years, right? So in 100 years, we killed the entire population of the Earth, the human population. So that doesn't seem like it's getting better, right? I think that, with the climate crisis, all the various crises that we're facing, the level of population, density, economic, material load on the Earth, I think that either we are somehow going to evolve, or we will become extinct. I don't really, what we are doing now is not sustainable. It's just not. And whereas we know, and this is something that we hear a lot, right? There's enough stuff on the earth for everybody, right? Enough food, enough water. Okay, but what you don't hear when people say that, and usually it's pretty comfortable people that say that, right? What you don't hear is that there is enough if we are meeting people's basic needs. There is not enough on the earth for everyone to live an American upper middle class lifestyle. In fact, it's estimated that if everybody on the planet tried to do that, we'd need 5 planets. And we don't have 5 planets. So, so what we are trying to do, this endless capitalist growth model, where everybody just has more and more and more and more and more all the time, is not sustainable. It's not going to work. So yeah, I think that the vote is out, right? We don't know. I mean, yeah, maybe things will get better, or maybe the universe will just move on, which might also be getting better. I mean, yeah.
Thanks, Dan. What do you say, or what do we say to people who are overwhelmed by all that's happening right now? And they say, I can't read the news, I can't go there, I have to carry on my life.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of them. I mean, we know a lot of them, and then there are a lot more we don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, so here's the thing. What the spiritual life essentially says is that you as individuals, we as individuals, and as small groups, we are not going to fix empire, right? I mean, Jesus never said, I'm going to fix empire. Now, a lot of his followers thought that's what he was going to do, right? But, Jesus said, give to Caesar what's Caesar's and give to God what's God's, right? So the spiritual life actually tells us the one thing that we can do is engage our spiritual lives in small communities. And that's what we should do. And I mean, I tell people all the time, if reading the news is overwhelming to you, don't read the news. You reading the news isn't going to change the news. It's not going to. You read as many stories as you want, that's not going to change anything. Now, if that is a life-giving activity for you because of how you're engaging in the world, great. Read the news. If all that does is make you sad and anxious, don't do it. Because that's disempowering you. You then can't function in the world, right? So the one thing that we have control over, and again, this is about these practices, we have control over how we practice our life, to at least some degree, and some people more than others, but everybody has at least a modicum of control of that. And so that's the thing that we are called to focus on in groups of people. Again, when the monastic tradition started, they had no idea they were going to change the empire. That wasn't the point. In fact, they were hoping that the empire went away as quickly as possible, collapsing under its own weight, which they always do. I mean, if you're feeling hopeless about what's going on right now, don't. This will all collapse under its own weight. It always does. Now, there's a lot of suffering when that happens, which is sad and hard. But, so the spiritual life is always drawing us back to ourselves. Like, again, we're in all kinds of organizations and groups. It's easy to rant and rave about the people outside of our organizations and groups that are not functional, but what's happening inside? That's what we can focus on. And then what always happens is, if a group of people really are doing these things differently, they become very interesting to everybody else. It's like, wow, those people seem happy. Those people are sharing their stuff. Nobody's hungry over there. Like, I'm hungry, but nobody's hungry over there. How are they doing that? Okay? You know, and again, to my mind, this is what every single church should be doing. Right? And if every single church was doing it, we would have a very different society. Right now, what every church is doing is, hey, come join us. We'll put you on a boring committee. People are like, that's not very interesting. I'm already on 5 boring committees. I do not need another one. Right? Yeah. So, you know, reading the news doesn't change anything.
Just maybe, last question quickly addressed.
Oh, you get the last word, Bill.
Right, no, you do. So number 1 is willful attention. Number 2 is boundary creation. Could you, and you've kind of talked around that a little bit more, the concept of a spiritual community, et cetera. But when you say boundary creation, give me a little bit more meat on that, how you proceed to that.
So I mentioned one thing about it, but it's, you know, and we all, here's the funny thing about all these practices. Like, we all know all this stuff. It's sort of the best kept secret in our own mind, right? So, look, we all know that if you want to get something done, right, let's be just very utilitarian, down to earth about it. Like you want to get something done. So you want to start an engineering company and you want to build houses, okay? So you don't say, hey, anybody can come here that wants to do anything. And somebody shows up and says, I want to run a daycare center. And you're like, great, we'll hire you. And somebody else comes up and says, I want to do brain surgery. And you're like, great, we'll hire you. And now, 5 years later, you got, 2 kids, somebody dead with their skull open, and maybe you're designing one house and you're going like, what, this is a crappy engineering company, right? Because there's no boundaries. You create the boundaries and intentions. You're saying, we're doing an engineering company, we're designing houses, and when the brain surgeon shows up, you point him towards, the hospital down the road. And when the daycare person shows up, you point him to the daycare, and you hire engineers and construction people that want to build houses. And you get even more specific. You don't hire a steel worker, because there's no steel in most houses, right? You send them down the road to the person that builds skyscrapers, right? So if we, Jesus had a very clear intention. The wisdom tradition has a very clear intention. We want to create the kingdom of God. That's what we want to do, right? So if we're going to do that, there needs to be boundaries around that intention. And, there's this great thing in Benedict's rule where it says when people show up at the monastery and they say, we want to join the monastery. Now, again, contrast this to the parish church. Like, somebody shows up at the parish church, says, I want to join the church, and we're like, let's give them a parade, right? Like, a new young family shows up at the church and they've got to beat people off with a stick. Oh my God, we love you, come on in, come in. They could be serial killers, you don't know, but you're just like, oh my God, a young family, this is so awesome, great, come on in, right? The instruction in Benedict's rule is you make them wait outside the wall of the monastery for 3 days. And people are like, that's really mean. No, it's not mean. It's a good boundary practice. Because we know all the time, we say, I want to do something, and then a couple days in, we're like, no, I really don't want to do this. This is hard. This is a bummer. I was wrong, right? But, if you got to sit out there 3 days, in the cold and the rain, and maybe you're getting a little hungry, you didn't bring enough food, if at the end of 3 days you still want to do it, then maybe you want to do it, right? Okay, now we'll let you in, right? So boundaries are just a really important communal practice in order to actually move forward what it is that we want to move forward. And without it, it's just, it's just chaos or codependence.
I think now we should
right.
quit. Will you hang around for a while?
Oh,
and
yeah.
Visit with whoever?
I will.
How about a round of applause for Dan?
Thank you.
So nice to have you here in 2025. Yes.
2025.
Yeah.
Time travel.
Yes, woohoo! Next week, Tom Anderson is here. He will be talking about our lovely rain garden. And so look forward to that next Sunday. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Dan. Yeah, sorry, I a little bit screwed up.
Yeah, no, it was wonderful.